So
go ahead.
Okay, so we're here with Julia, who is going to talk to us about her book, Better Luck Next Time. Julia, this is really such a fun book, and I think the premise of it is really fascinating. Can you tell us, like, we know that your father was a cowboy on one of these ranches. How did you find out about that? Did he tell you about that?
He used to talk about it when we were little. And you know how when you're a kid and your parents tell stories over and over and you're just like, oh no, here we go again with this one. And you pay no attention. And then by the time I was old enough to think it was interesting, he was too old. He was senile, so he couldn't really talk about it anymore. But I have a picture of it. I have visual aids. Prepare yourself. Here's a picture of him. It might be in the paperback copy. This is what he looked like when he was about to go to World War II. So he was probably 25 or something like that. So what had happened, and my brother actually filled me in on a lot of it, because he would tell I have a sister and a brother, and he would tell my brother more than he told us. And so my brother listened to the audiobook, and he's like, well, Snork, you know why how he happened to have that job? And I said, actually, I don't know. And he said, well, he was working construction out west, and he heard about this job, and he thought it would be more fun than what he was doing. So he got it. I was like, oh my God, I was so excited, because that was what I made up after I did research. I was like, well, this is plausible. Then he would be really jacked, from manual labor. And my father was a very good dancer, and he was very charming and funny. And so it really was a perfect job for him. But the thing that my brother told me that I didn't know, aside from that, was he said, you know how old he was? I was like, I don't know. And he said, he was 19. I was like, oh. So he, like Ward, did not tell his parents what he was doing, because he figured they would hit the ceiling, and somehow they got wind of it, and they drove to Reno and grabbed him by the scruff of the neck and took him home. So
wow.
And it was, so I also felt validated by that, because I was like, Ward is very intent on not letting his parents know, because he figured it would upset him. And so was my father. So it's like I was like channeling my father from beyond the grave. So that was sort of fun.
Wow.
But, it was fun for me to do all the research, because it really made me sort of understand more about what he did and what it must have been like for him, and all that stuff, in a way that you don't always get to do with your parents when, after they're gone. So I enjoyed that part too. So.
Told your mom about it?
My mother, I think she knows. My mother's 93. She was a doctor. That's why Ward is a doctor, because I had all of her doctoring stuff, and she was sort of the beating heart of my small town, because she delivered half the people in town, and she was everybody's doctor. But she has dementia, and so we've talked about it, but I don't think it's stuck with her. She may know. I don't know. She has it and everything, but that's why the book is set up the way it is. It's why Ward is in an old folks home. The difference between my mother and him is that she's mentally fragile and he's physically fragile. But for somebody who is so the center of everything to just be sort of shuffled aside is super heartbreaking to me. Like, I find this book incredibly sad, even though it is giddy. But I said to Coco's my daughter, I said to Coco, oh, I just thought of a new tagline for my book. It puts the giddy in giddy up. She just like, oh, but anyway, but that's sort of why it's set up the way it is, like why he's in an old folks home, and why somebody is coming and he's telling the story. Because when my mother would make her rounds after the hospital, she would go to the nursing home was attached to the hospital, and she would go through she'd do her rounds there, and then she'd say to the nurses, save a place for me. And of course, that's not where she is now, because none of us live there. She's by my brother. But like, that was super poignant to me. I was just like, oh my God, little did she know what lay ahead. So, but let's not talk about the sad parts anymore. We'll just skip right past all those. Oh, there's Mary Todd Lincoln. Hello. We're very close, Mary Todd Lincoln and I. So.
Way back.
Does she ask about me all the time?
All the time. All the time. She can't wait till you can come to Tupelo.
Oh, I can't either.
Hey, So Julia, you mentioned when I wrote you and said like, "Ooh, we really want to do this, have food ideas," you said that there was some drama about the French 75.
Yes, hilariously. Yeah, my editor really cracks me up. She's a brilliant genius, but she like, was it her or was it copy editor? I think it was her. She's like, French 75s don't have maraschino cherries in them. And I said, well, some of them do. She's like, no, I'm afraid they don't. So I was like, you know what, just call it whatever you want to. But the other really funny argument, it's more like what French people call a Mr. and Mrs., which is just like a bickering kind of argument, was I grew up on a horse farm, and Kate grew up in either New Hampshire or Vermont. I can't keep those states straight, but she's like, you know, the horse Dumpling is kind of old, and there are two people riding him bareback. I think that's too much for him. I said, well, he's really more a middle-aged horse, and you know, they're not using the saddle, and it's really fine. You know, I wouldn't worry about it. And she said, well, no, I think he's too old. I think it's too much for him. And like we went back and forth. I was like, Kate, which one of us grew up on a horse farm, for one thing? And for another thing, that's like you say, because the horse is like around 15 or 16, which is firmly in middle age for a horse. And I said, that's like you saying to me, Julia, you old bag, those two suitcases are too heavy for you. Let's find somebody young and strong and I would take you by the scruff of the neck. I was like, I can carry them, you know. So it was just a funny argument to have with somebody who had no idea, but she just wanted to make sure that I didn't, you know, mess it up. So she is amazing, my editor. So, but you know, can I tell the Nikki Kaufman story too?
Please.
There's so many stories, but when I have a hard, I don't know if any of you have read my first book, but in it, there's a woman who's a writer, and she has a hard time naming characters. And she also has a hard time writing her second book. Why did I do that to myself? And I would think, oh Lord, but that's another story. But I was like, and I read this book. I don't know if you guys have ever read it. Have you ever read So We Read On by Maureen Corrigan? It's about the writing of The Great Gatsby. It's fantastically good, because part of my research for this book was I read books about the 30s, books that were written in the 30s, and books about people who wrote books in the 30s, just to try to get in the head. And it's about the writing of The Great Gatsby. And so in it, she said that Fitzgerald would name characters after friends of his. And I was like, well, that's a really good idea, but you don't want to like do your friends, because then it's like one's going to say, well, why did you choose out, you know, this one and not me, or your relatives, God forbid, you know. So, but I was like, I'm going to name it after friends of mine who I, you know, or, you know, who would be very excited about it, who is not a close personal friend of mine. I was like, booksellers. Because I made so many friends from Frank, because they were anybody, it's like when somebody loves your child, you love them back. So if they loved my book, I loved them back. And so Nikki was one of them. And so I called up Nikki and I said, can I name I emailed her actually, can I name the villain in my book after Archer, her little boy, the world's cutest child? And she's like, yes. So then like, the various other ones are like, there are two that are straight up booksellers' names. One is Emily Summer, who is at East City Bookshop in Washington, D.C. Has anybody read Mary Jane by Jessica Anya Blau?
Oh, we have it. Yeah, we have
Yeah,
it.
it's so good. And she and I had the same editor. And so she and I were talking, and she's like, hey, she read my book and she's like, hey, you know, there's a bookseller in Washington named Emily Summer. And I was like, yeah. So she was one. And then the other was named Maxwell Gregory is a female who used to work at Lake Forest Books, but I loved her name. So I used her name. And then I used half of one name, half of another. Because if you had a name that didn't work for that period, like Destiny, for example, no, you know, I had a chart to figure out when the characters needed to be born, and nobody in 1902 was naming their kid Destiny. So then I choose like a first name of one, a last name of another. So that was really fun. And it was, you know, as a writer, you don't have a lot you can give back to people aside from endless pleasure and joy. But it was like, you know, that's like for all the people who were such big supporters of mine, that was like a gift I could give. So that was very exciting for me, because it's so hard to name characters because it's so fraught. So that was not a question you asked, but it's an answer I gave you anyway.
Guy. I mean, not bad, but bad,
Yeah, he was somewhat bad. There's a little bit of a lag with you, Nikki, so sometimes I don't hear what you said. If I look at you and go, huh? That's why.
I am quarantining from home because of COVID.
Oh, honey, are you sick or did? Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, Archer, the dream boy, brought COVID home from preschool.
Typhoid Mary, Archer.
And then, right in my face.
You had no choice. Have you guys read that Mary Elizabeth Keene, is that her name, who wrote Fever? It's about Typhoid Mary. I read it last year. I was like, this is so interesting to me now. It's another little thing you might want to look into. I'm so sorry. Are you really sick? Okay.
I'm tired, just tired.
Okay.
And also just, so much Archer, really. Archer, just so artsy at the
people with little kids. My heart bleeds for you, because luckily my children are I guess a lot of people have them from that.
Everybody's laughing here. Yeah.
But my children were supposed to graduate in 2020 on the same day, and we're like, what are we going to do? How can we be in two different states at once? And then COVID took care of it, so they and they all lived here. And then it's a lot to have everybody, even when they're grown-ups. It's a lot to have everybody at home.
Yeah.
Anyway,
hey, so one thing I wanted to point out, well, the 1930s is just a really fun. Well, can you say it was a fun time? Because
we loved it.
I mean, but
we were so happy.
it's a fun time to imagine, because of all the juxtapositions. Like, you think about, these people who had nothing and were losing their farms. And then you've got all these rich ladies who are, driving vehicles when nobody did that. And I saw I was wondering if any of these ladies were kind of based on any real life figures. But I saw in the acknowledgments, you said something about, you found an obituary for a lady who had been a pilot and all of these things.
I can tell you that story. Here's the story. Yeah. I'm obsessed with obituary. So anybody who comes across a really good one, just send it to me. It's my favorite thing, because the guy who started writing the hilarious obituaries from the New York Times was from my hometown, Shelbyville, Tennessee. Okay. And his mother had the best obituary writer's death. I mean, death is never fun, but he was, but she was at ladies' lunch at the country club, and she had a heart attack and went face down in her soup. And that was that. I was like, well, that's kind of a good way to go. But anyway, and then that's how I got into him. So I'd listen to him all the time. So there's this excellent documentary called Obit, and it's about the writers of the New York Times obituaries. And in it, I loved that not surprisingly, in it they showed the filmmakers, they have in the basement like a bunch of filing cabinets, like my filing cabinet, that have all the obituaries they write in advance, because if you're really old or you have a dangerous line of work, they write your obituary in advance, so they'll have it ready, so they can instantly do it. And so they showed them the one that they had in the files the longest, which was for a woman named Eleanor Smith. And Eleanor Smith, as a young teenager, like maybe 14 or 15, she had a pilot's license, and she flew her little Cracker Jack box airplane under all of the bridges that go around Manhattan, and nobody's done it before or since. And so she was like 15 or 16. They're like, well, she's not going to live long. But then she lived to be 98. And I was like, I love that. So that was part of it. And then that made me start thinking about, and I fell into a rabbit hole of aviatrix memoirs. And then, and you're from Nashville, right? Is it you who's from Nashville? Yeah. So yeah. The current mayor of Nashville is named John Cooper, and he is a childhood friend of mine. Like, my mother was his mother's doctor, and his mother was maybe 5 feet tall. And she,
so was John Cooper.
He's like 5'6". Come on. But I love John Cooper with every ounce of my heart. But anyway, his mother, oh my God, Miss Help. No, that's not her name. I can't believe I can't think of her name. Doesn't matter. During World War II, she delivered airplanes she was a WASP, Women's Auxiliary Service Pilots, I think is what it stands for. They could deliver airplanes and they could teach people to fly, but they could do nothing else. And I was always fascinated by her when I was young, because she was like so tiny. I was like, how did she even reach the pedals? You know, so after I saw the Eleanor Smith thing, and then I started thinking about Mrs. Cooper, and I was like, oh, I've got to have an aviator. And the funny thing is, like, people were like, a lot of those rich ladies were like, everybody's going to fly soon. So we were just, you know, the first of them. It's everybody's going to have one in their garage. And they had these airplanes that had the wings that folded back, like Nina does in the book.
Yeah.
So I figured out what kind of plane I thought she would probably fly. And then I went on the YouTube and I like typed it in, because often you can find people doing a walk around of something that you need to actually really know what it looks like in 3 dimensions so you can talk about it. And this guy had that particular plane. And so he, you know, hauls it out and the wings folded back, and it really did look like a soapbox derby car. I mean, I am not kidding. And he pulled out one wing, and then there was like a lever that was like my finger, like this. Put it around, it went into a slot, and then he had a strap that was like my watch band. It was this thick, strapped it over the thing, and it snapped. It didn't even buckle. And I was like, oh my God, I would never set foot in that death trap. So that's what I have Emily say when she sees it. She's like, I would never set foot in that death trap. And you can't believe how fragile they were, but they had like that so everybody could have one in there. It would fit in the garage with your, you know, 7 or 8 limousines. So, but that's where that's a long-winded answer to that's where the aviatrix angle came from.
But what about the other women, right? Like they're, you know, they're all wealthy, obviously, but like they're really different.
Yes. Well, that's where I used my imagination. But also, like, Chris is my husband, and Chris loved the Zeppelin. And I said, well, of course you love the Zeppelin. The Zeppelin's me. And he said, well, you know, Nina's also you. And I said, yeah, but they're like me at different ages, like young me and old me. And that's why they butt heads, is, you know, how when you meet somebody who's like you and you see things in them that you know you have, and you're like, I will never like this person. Yeah, so some of that, and that's their antagonism. And like Mary Louise, I loved Mary Louise. She made me laugh so hard because there was somebody I knew in Shelbyville, and I had treasured so many things she had said for like 40 years, you know? And so one of them was like, how did it go? She was like, she married a very rich man, and his wife had died. I can't remember if this story made it in, but and so she was his second wife, but he still had his mother-in-law lived with him, who was ancient. And she's like, you know, if Miss Doty, if he dies and Miss Doty's dead, I get all about, wait, if he dies first, we have to split his money. But if she dies first, I get it all. And then and this is the one I think I used for Mary Louise, which is she had a former boyfriend who was not nice, and he had cheated on her in their own home, in their, you know, in their connubial bed. And so she said, you know, I just didn't worry about trying to get even with him because I knew that God would take care of it for me. And she went drinking and driving, and she had a wreck, and now she's a vegetable over in the nursing home. And I was like, wow. I've held on to that for so long. And then I was like, oh my God, it can go in there. And their poster writing is no fun. I will not lie to you. But every now and then you think, oh, I can finally use this story. So that part's really fun.
That's awesome. Wow. Do you want to ask for questions? Yeah, we have a couple questions from the audience. I wish you could see them. We have it dim in here so they can see you well, but we'll try to.
It's very romantic this way.
I know. It kind of makes it fun.
You're in the bookstore, aren't you?
We're in the bookstore. Yeah.
I have been there. I have had my picture taken with Elvis there. So.
Oh, fun.
You know what? I was talking to Chris about it. I said, you know, we went to this bookstore. He said, it was raining that day because we live in Los Angeles. It's like, oh, something that you guys will not remember. But
Sonia has a question. Okay.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Can you hear her?
I think so. Let's find out.
I can translate if not.
Okay. I wanted to know if by any chance you were inspired by Claire Booth Luce's play, The Women. Because that a part of that, as you remember, takes place on a ranch in Reno.
Yes.
When the women, they're divorcing their husband. Did you read that, or were you influenced?
I knew that already because I just knew it, but I read her, not her memoir, her biography. And she got divorced. Okay. Claire Booth was named, Claire, I can't remember her first name, but she married, Mr. Booth, who was fantastically wealthy, but a lush. And so she decided she married aspirationally always. And so that guy was super rich, but hard to live with. So she went to Reno so she could divorce him and marry Luce. Oh God, the guy who ran Time Incorporated, Henry Luce was his name. And so she went to a divorce ranch and got, the idea for that and wrote the play, and then it became a movie. It was very successful. And there've been people who've said, why did you write this from a male point of view? And part of it was because it was based on my father, but part of it too was like the women side you had already. And to me, I was thinking about, because I have many favorite books, and two of them are True Grit and Remains of the Day. And I had the ones I really like on my desk, so that by osmosis, the genius will just sort of come. So I was like, oh my God, I am writing True Grit meets Remains of the Day. The cowboys they're the butlers, so that seemed really interesting to me, because it's really a story about like the guy who was on the top of the world who suddenly was reduced to like being the servant for other people and being undervalued for like, he had a very high opinion. He was the prince of his hometown. And my father had a fantastically wealthy first wife, which I think he must have met on the divorce ranch, because he was from a tiny town in West Tennessee. And where was he going to meet a fantastically wealthy woman? And he was her second husband of 6.
Oh, wow.
So where was he going to meet a really rich woman who would go on to have 6 husbands? Mm-hmm. Who knows? But I think it chapped him that like the ladies did not appreciate that he was the Prince of Brownsville, Tennessee. And there's a story he used to tell about he was at the movies somewhere. This was probably not in Reno, but a lady came and sat down next to him and said, "Are you from the South?" And he said, "I am." And she said, "Oh, good, I can take my shoes off." And it enraged him so that when the movie was over, he just picked her shoes up and left them at the ticket booth. So, but like he was really had a chip on his shoulder about like people assuming he was dumb because he had a Southern accent, so, but yes, Claire Booth, that was a part of it. So there's your long-winded answer. Oh, can I tell you another thing? Speaking of information, because I read all these books about the 30s, right? And I read this book, I can't think of the name of it. Dang it. It was about a very fancy apartment building in New York City where rich people, it was one of the first big fancy apartment buildings, and people moved in there around that time. So there was a woman in there who lived there who was fantastically wealthy, but she had been born on a dirt farm in Texas, and she was fantastically gorgeous. And so she kept just marrying richer guys, And so she was getting, and it may have even happened in Reno, I can't remember now, but she went to this party, wherever it was, and she wore basically a pair of red high heels and nothing else, and said to her friend, essentially, they need to see the product. How she put it, but I was just like, I was agog. I was like, okay, that is going to have to go in it. Oh, and this is really fun too, to me. These are the things I got excited about while I was writing it. So I knew that she had to go to this party basically buck naked, but because I didn't want him, like it to be clear to everybody who it was, they had to wear masks. And there was a place in Reno called Tony's Spanish Ballroom where every week or every month, now I can't remember, they would have a masquerade ball. It's like, oh, they'll go to the masquerade ball. Well, she needs to wear a mask. Well, what is the mask going to be? And then how did this come up? It may have just like floated through my brain. My son had played Bottom in his high school production of A Midsummer Night's Dream. And he had this paper mache donkey's head, and it was a thing of beauty. I wish I had a picture of it, because I thought about it way too much. And I was like, she can wear the donkey's head. Oh my God. And then I can have like a Midsummer Night Dream thing, because it is sort of an idyll away from the real world. So, blah, blah, blah. And so then my editor was like, you know what I loved about the donkey's head was it started out as a sight gag. And that's why she had to have the pearls. So he would recognize her from her pearls also, and her incredible height. Started out as a sight gag. Then it was what did she say? Sight gag. Then it was a plot device. And then it was a metaphor. And I was like, yes, I did that on purpose. It was, and I said, and listen to this, Kate. She becomes obsessed with the fairy costume. Are you with me? And she flies into town, and she's kind of their fairy godmother. See how that worked out? But like when something works out like that, it made me think about how when you're like a freshman in high school and you read some classic novel and your teacher says to you, and see how the symbolism, blah, 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 blah. And I was like, oh my God, it's a happy accident. Maybe sometimes they set out to do it, but it was very exciting. And then like when the book comes out, you have to, before it is published, they send you back page proofs and you have to read through them. And every time you can do it, you can change a little bit less. So at first you can really change, and it's been away from you for a while, so you've had a break from it. So the next to the last page proof that came through, it struck me that, everybody in pretty much our main characters have worn the angel wings, and Dumpling is about to meet his maker the next day. And the symbol of the ranch was the Pegasus. I was like, he needs to have the wings on. So in the last scene, I added that in, like in the next to the last edit of the page proofs. And I was very pleased with myself, because I was like, oh, it's working as a symbol. Because I used to call Chris, I'd talk to my husband about my book, and it'd be like, Dumpling's the 2,000-pound metaphor. So anyway, so that happened. So then the last page proof came through and they said, okay, spelling and punctuation, nothing else. You can't change anything else about it. And I said, okay. So then when I was reading it that time, I was like, oh my God, here's the other thing I didn't pick up on, is like, there's a whole motif of uncelebrated funerals that are unmarked graves. There's like his parents, then his uncle, and then his, when he goes into the old folks home, he plans his own funeral. Well, that wasn't in the original thing. I only put it in the last page proofs. And I was like, oh, it's too late. Oh, so I wrote it anyway. And I wrote to Kate and I said, I know it's too late. I understand that. I don't expect you to change this, but I want you to understand that I finally got the fact that there was this motif there and should have been in there. And she actually called me on the telephone and said, oh, it's going in. So that was like really super thrilling. So it really makes you understand like the process of book writing more when you're on this side of it, like how random stuff is, and just, how you pluck things out of corners of your brain. And a lot of it is not planned, but it's just happenstance. So that was a long answer to no question that anybody asked.
No, it's fascinating to hear. Tell us a little bit about how you got started. Like what got you on this path of writing?
Being a writer? Oh God, it's a tortured one. When I was young, I was like, I'm going to be a famous writer. And I was in college at the University of Virginia, and I was a good writer, but I was also extremely idiotic and very giggly. I know you find that hard to believe, but one of my undergraduate writing teachers put me in graduate writing classes. She said, this is where you need to be. So I was in and their graduate writing program was pretty new. I'm sure they're like, we need some more warm bodies in here. So, and whenever it would be my turn to talk, you could just see the other grad students just going, oh God, here we go again, this idiot. So then I went to graduate school in Boston at BU for a year. And then I moved to New York and I worked in the fiction department at Mademoiselle magazine. I was the fiction assistant. And it was extremely useful to me because I had to read 10,000 manuscripts a year to be able to find 12 that we could publish. And it was really a chore, like it was almost impossible. And it made me understand a lot of things, one of which is like, being able to write a beautiful sentence if you have no story to tell is possibly the most boring thing you are ever going to come across in your life. Because I mean, even now you read like books that got published where you just think, oh my God, enough of the, what my husband calls like a search inside one man's soul. I'm like, I need some story. Something's got to happen. And so, and then there were like people who were better at story, but they couldn't write that well. And you could almost really work with that more. And then there were people who just couldn't write at all. So then what I took away from that experience, because I was in my 20s, it was like, if you don't have a story to tell, Toots, no, don't even start, because it's hundreds of pages. I don't know if you know this. The novellas are very long. And so I was a magazine writer forever. And then my husband, I know you're very proud to learn this, was one of the original writers of Beavis and Butthead. And so,
What?
I know you're proud. And
That's
so,
hilarious.
so we moved and then that ended, and we moved from New York to Los Angeles because he got a job on a show called News Radio, which was very funny.
Mhm.
And then he worked on Frasier, and Frasier.
Oh, I love Frasier.
Yes, there was a character that was named after me, not to brag, but it was like when oh my God, the one who went to prison for the, for not in real life, because that was the getting your child into college thing. I can't think of her name.
Oh, yeah.
Felicity.
Lori Laughlin or
Other one.
Felicity Huffman. Felicity
Felicity
Huffman, maybe.
Felicity Huffman was a love interest for Frasier for a while, and so her name was Julia Wilcox, because you'll be shocked to hear there are other Julia Johnsons in Los Angeles. They have to do a name search whenever they name a character. So if there's somebody named that in that town, they can't be named that. So Wilcox is a street really long. So Julia Wilcox. But Beavis and Butthead and Frasier are the same character, really. So it's dynamic. They're idiots, but they're smart idiots on Frasier, and they're just idiots. And right now he's working on the Beavis and Butthead reboot. So I'm at my desk just like with blood coming out of my eyes, because it's so unfun to write novels. And I can hear him and they're just laughing himself silly. So anyway, that's so anyway, I forgot why I was telling you this story. The reason, so we moved to LA. I got pregnant the first day we lived here, because everything grows in Los Angeles. I'd been trying for years. And then I had kids, and, unlike, I had assumed they raised themselves, but apparently not. So attention had to be paid up, and I had my two kids. And then I was walking down the street one day, and I was thinking of Coco had read To Kill a Mockingbird for school. She was 10. And I was thinking about it because I hadn't read it since I was 13, and I read it again so we could discuss it, which never happened. You'll be surprised to hear. But I was thinking about Boo Radley, and I was like, oh, he must be on the autism spectrum, which had never occurred to me before. And because I had kids, my next thought was, well, I'll tell you, it'd be a lot easier to write that character than to raise him. And I thought, oh, that would be kind of a good book. So that was my first book. It's somebody who is a writer who has a hard time naming her characters, and struggles with her second book. And then she writes a book about somebody in her first book, and then names it. So that's how it got started. It actually went very smoothly. Like, I wrote it. It took 5 years. I wrote it. I got an agent instantly. It was crazy. So then, and people loved it. I was like, what is happening? But then the second novel is much harder to write. I found out. And so that one, the one that you guys read, I wrote 3 versions of it. The first time it was in third person. And Kate said, I don't know, Julia. I mean, you're all like voice and throwaway jokes. I think this third person is not working for you. I'm going to have to say no. So after I removed the stake from my heart, I was able to go, you know what? If you just give up, then all that time is wasted. So I started again. I turned in the second one, and she said, I love the prologue. I hate the rest of it. But she was not wrong, because I loved the prologue and hated the rest of it also. But then at least she bought it off of the prologue. So then, there was like an end in sight then. So I was able to do it then. And I had, I'd been working on it for years. Oh, I have a fun picture. I'd been working on it for years. Where did it go? Oh, it's here. When I started writing it, I said, I'm not going to cut my hair till it's done. So this is how, can you see this? This is how long my hair was when I started. This is it. And then here's how long it was when I finished.
Wow.
I know, right? So I was just
Wow.
like,
That's a good
it was,
visual.
it was a painful process. My hair gets where like you cleave in two. That's how long it was. And my hair had never been that long in my life. But
Wow.
oh, and this is another visual if you want to see this. This is a cover of Life magazine from 1937. She's just gotten a divorce. This is the courthouse. So you would kiss the courthouse column, then you would walk half a block, and that would put you on the bridge over the river. You'd throw your rings on, and then you could go. You didn't have to throw your rings in, but you could, and you could instantly get married again. So I did a book group in Northern California. I can't think of the name of the town. And at the end of it, one of the ladies, and this is the fun thing about book groups, like they were clearly all stupendously wealthy, because like I'm talking to them and go, wow, look at that art they've got in the background. Whoa, what is that? But one of the ladies said, okay, I got divorced in Reno. And I was like, how did I do? And she said, well, you did great. Everything was perfect. When I went, she went in the 50s, and she took her kids with her, and she ran. Oh, and this is in the back of the paperback. I think I tell this story. They rented a house in town, and she just went around town with her kids in a wagon until the 6 weeks were over. She got divorced, and then she got married again instantly. And I was like, wow. So I was thrilled, as you can imagine, about that. I don't know what you asked me, but once again, I have answered. I'd ask questions, so.
It doesn't matter. Your answers are great. Or do anybody else have any other questions you want to ask?
What's the Tupelo connection?
Oh, Archie.
It's
son,
Archer. Archer,
yeah,
it's named after him.
the villain.
And can I tell you the other thing that thrilled me to pieces? Because of Archer, like I had named it Archer after him. And independently of that, long before that, I had decided that Emily was going to drive a Pierce Arrow. And at some point, close to the end, I was like, holy Joe, the hood ornament on a Pierce Arrow is a tiny Archer. What are the chances? And I was so thrilled. It almost made all the suffering worthwhile. Not really, but you have to take your joy where you can find it. I was so happy about that. So.
And then there's scene with her undergarments flying.
Oh yeah, I wanted to make sure everybody noticed that it was an Archer, So, and it's funny because my daughter was like, why am I not in a book that you write? And I was like, be careful what you wish for. I don't know if, do you guys read acknowledgments of books? Because
Yeah.
often they are boring, but sometimes they're fun. So I try to write fun ones. And the final gag in the acknowledgments is some joke about my daughter. I can't even remember what it is now. And so I said to her, need to read this, because if it makes you mad, I won't publish it. But I think it's a really good joke. So if it makes you mad, I'm going to be super disappointed. But she was like, no, it's fine. It's fine. So
That's awesome.
anyway.
Wow.
But when Coco was little, she used to tell like people in preschool, they'd say, what are your parents doing? She said, oh, my father works for Fraser. My grandmother is a doctor, and my mother plays computer games all day. So.
I think there's another question. Hold on.
Okay, let's have it.
Is there another question? Did somebody else say something? I thought I heard somebody. Oh, they were looking up the Pierce Arrow.
The Pierce Arrow, they're gorgeous. Oh my God. And when I found out like they made them that had a compartment for your golf clubs, I was like, oh my God. I was so excited. I could hardly stand it. And then somebody in a book group I did said, could you get them with cashmere upholstery? I said, I don't know. If they didn't come with cashmere upholstery, you could probably just get it done. So anyway.
Oh, and then the cats would have kittens all over it.
Well,
Oh. I was like,
that's the story on that story. When my aunt got married, she was going to wear my grandmother's Irish lace from the 1870s, probably. Because my father was really old. Wedding gown, and they laid it out on the bed in the guest room so that it could air out before the wedding. And then the cat the night before went in and had kittens on it.
Oh
So
my
that story has stuck with
goodness.
me forever. So they had to make her a dress overnight to wear. But I think about that way too much. I was just like, can use the kittens. Here's how the kittens can come in.
Oh,
There's a lot
wow.
in that bag.
Okay, we have one.
Okay. So to the ending of the book, when he meets the grandson, tee up for a second.
What'd you
Oh,
say?
did you hear that? Okay, she said the ending of the book where he meets
Uh-huh.
the grandson. Are you setting us up for another installment in that?
Well, hang on a second, because I'm guessing you guys assume that you is a boy, because you is not a boy. It is his granddaughter.
Oh, okay.
And here's the thing, like there was the original, the way I set the book up in the third version was that I was like, well, I guess I can do first person. I'll just do that again. And Kate said, well, when you do a story to a you, it's actually second person, which I didn't understand, but whatever. But I'd written it that way. And then the final chapter was in third person, because I couldn't understand how I could make it work so that you could know what had really happened. And so Kate was like, I love everything about the last chapter, except it has to be in second person, just like the rest of it. And I was like, the love of God. And so I wrote it again. But in the original last chapter, you find out that you's name, which is, it's Edie. She is a forensic accountant. And she says to her mother, I find people all the time. That's what I do. Like as a forensic accountant, and we chase people down. I can find him. And there was another thing. But what was funny about it was I had named Edie after somebody, and I told them it was somebody my daughter had worked for who I loved. And then that chapter got cut out, and I was like, oh my God, I told this character after. This is what I get for naming it after somebody that I actually know who like lives close to me. What was I thinking? And then it was the Barnes and Noble book club pick for January. And so they printed a special edition. You had to have extra things to put in the back. And so they printed the original last chapter. And so I called Edie and I said, oh, Edie, I'm so excited. I can give you this copy of the book. And it's got, there was a character that one of the main characters named after you, but this is the only way you can see that it was actually named after you. And she said, you named a character after me? She had totally forgotten. I laid awake at night going, oh my God. So, but yes, it is and here's why I thought you might guess that it was a granddaughter. There are two things. And one of them is like, when he says in passing, I felt like I took an ad out on the front of the New York Times, which said, it's a girl and it's his granddaughter. He said, it's a rose colored ring like the one you have on. So she's wearing the ring. What's the other one? I can't remember what the other one is, but there are two things where I felt like I just gave it away. And then people didn't. Yeah, people didn't do it. So that's like when you're too far into something, you just feel like you're being super obvious. And it turns out it's not that way at all. So, but and then the grandson, what was the question that she asked about?
Second.
Is there going to be another one? I think it should be on television as a limited series so that there are other people writing it, not me. And, but yeah, I don't know. I hadn't thought about that actually. Cause with the first book, people ask me that all the time. But this one, I hadn't really thought about. I mean, it would make sense. I mean, I don't know. I haven't got a good answer for that one, and I'm not being able to make one up on short notice.
Well, I feel like she left us hanging as well.
Oh, she's just saying she felt like we got left hanging just a little bit, just wanting more.
Oh, well, that's good. Yes, I will write another one. I can call you up and say, well, then here's what happened.
Here's the plot.
Here's the next part.
Actually, that would actually make it pretty fascinating. I think that would be a great TV show or movie. I mean, just visually, that would be a lot of fun. You could see that being a lot of fun.
Oh my God, because you have the set, because from Chris, I know how it works. You have a set and then the other characters come through it. That's why Frasier was very successful. It's all the people he talked to who came through. But you guys might find this interesting because I don't outline before I do this. I outline after I've done it. Can you see this?
Oh, wow.
how I keep track of each chapter. So in these squares here, these are, it's like a big Post-it note where after I finish a chapter, I would write it. I did this with my first book too, and stick it to this, but it would flutter off. And one of my friends, who's named Christina Alger, who writes not murder, she writes thrillers. She said, Julia, push pens. I was like, oh my God, push pens. So can you see behind me? This is the cover of my first book, and I got it framed. And so it came with a big piece of cardboard on it. I said, oh my God, I've got a big piece of cardboard, and the mojo of it will work out. So that's this big piece of cardboard. So each chapter I would write it, and then I would push pin it up, because a book, there's so much in a book that you lose track of where things happen. And if you need to find it, it really helps. And then this is a map of Pyramid Lake. And then it's also a chart of the phases of the moon in June and July of 1938, because so much in the book happens at night and it needed to be conceivable that you could actually see it. And then, let's see, this blue column here, there's 7 or 8 of those. It's what my husband calls sequences. It's like action that happens over several chapters. So you can kind of see the ebb and flow of the book. And then these 2 yellow lines here, they're the first and last line of every chapter, because I wanted people to read. I learned this from the Hunger Games, because my neighbor across the street taught school. She's like, I want you to read this book. It seems like it's kind of good, and I want somebody to talk to about it. So I read it, and it's, not literature for the ages, but it's very well paced and it's well written. And she did this thing where the last line of every chapter would be so gripping, and then the first line of the next chapter would be super gripping. And their chapters were usually about 10 pages long. So I was like, I'll read another chapter. It's only 10 pages. And then you've read the whole book. So that was my evil intent, that people would just read the last line of each chapter and go, oh, it's only 10. I read the next one. This one is everything that happened in every chapter boiled down to one line. So to help me find it. And then these randomy things are all just ideas that I never use, but you can't throw them away. They might come in useful. So I think that's super interesting too. So.
Aww. Well, does anybody else have any other questions, burning questions you want to ask? Okay, we have one more. Hold on.
Okay. Yeah, I can talk all night. So shockingly.
It had to do I actually got the question from another book club blog.
Okay.
It asks about what would the story be like if it wasn't based off of wealthy women going to a dude ranch.
And I couldn't quite hear her, so you have to repeat it.
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. She was saying, what would the scenario be like if this wasn't based on wealthy women going to a dude ranch? But are you saying like poor women? Yeah, like.
Oh yeah, I can tell you what it was like for everybody, because I did research into all of it. Because a lot of people, I used to know, I had it written down somewhere, how many people would get divorced in a year, and they would go here's how it all started. In the 1800s, in the middle of 1850 or so, there was a silver rush in Nevada. And so a lot of men went, and there were not a lot of women. And so they're like, unmarried men, my ring light is here. This is when Chris got nominated for an Emmy for the show he was working on. They gave us a ring light, and I've used it endlessly. Anyway, it destabilizes a society if there are a lot of unmarried men. So if somebody was unhappily married, they wanted to make it easy for them to get divorced so that they could marry somebody else. And the miner lady who was the richest woman in America, who then died penniless, who I talk about in there, she was one of those people. And she used to wash clothes for the miners, and somebody paid her in a stake. Like he said, here's this property, and then it hit it big. So she became wealthy. So they made it easy to get divorced. So that was one reason people would go to Reno. Then it was accessible by train as well. And it's not really in the middle, but it's kind of in the middle of the country, but a lot of trains went there. So you could get there. And then, rich and poor alike went there. And I read this, this is how I got the title of the book. I read a memoir of the most prominent divorce judge during this time, whose name was George Bartlett. And it was fascinating because he talked about all the different kinds of people who got divorces. And, some of them would live in they'd rent a bedroom in a house. If you've ever seen the Misfits, I think Marilyn Monroe's character is getting a divorce. And I think she's renting a room in a house in that one. They were fancy hotels they could stay in. And there was also musicians, when they travel cross country, there was in their contracts, they could only go a certain distance before having to pay something else. And Reno was a good stop off. So they had good entertainment. They built fancy hotels. You could live in rent a room from somebody's house. They had campgrounds. People would just camp out. They'd get jobs in because there were actually jobs there because of all the tourism. And then do you know there was a divorce industry in Hot Springs, Arkansas as well? And so then they got into a competition with them who could have the fastest divorce. And so that's how it got down to 6 weeks, because it brought in a bunch of money. And there was so much, and there's a passage in the book where they talk about it. There was so much money funneling through Reno that it was a big with a mob, and they would launder money there. But because of all the tourist stuff, there were jobs. So a lot of people would come and they'd work like at a lunch counter at the Woolworths until they got their divorce, and then they could leave. But the George Bartlett story, his memoir was fantastic, and it had a really good joke in it, which I lifted, but I gave him credit in the acknowledgments. And so, and he would, when he divorced people, when at the end of the thing, he would hit his mallet and say, you're free now, or whatever, better luck next time. And so there was my title. I was very excited about it. So I was talking to my friend Denise, who lives in Como, Mississippi. This is how I ended up in Tupelo. I went to the Oxford Book Festival. And while I was there, I came to you guys. So I was telling Denise, my cousin, this story. She goes, wait a minute. My best friend here in Como is Mike Bartlett, and Judge Bartlett was his grandfather. And moreover, you have met Mike Bartlett, because when I went to the Oxford Book Festival, she and her husband and their best friend, had couples date. They came and we all had dinner together, but I didn't realize that his grandfather was going to be very important to me in my future.
Wow.
So, but anyway, that's where the title came from. God, that was such a good memoir. Because some of it was super heartbreaking because the terrible things people would do to each other, but then some of them would be like, he didn't like my hat. He played his music too loud, like stuff like they just had to come up with something, but I'm so grateful for divorce, because Daddy had the first wife. And if he hadn't gotten divorced, I wouldn't be here. And I had an unfortunate first marriage also. And I've been married to my second husband for more than 30 years. So if I hadn't been able to get divorced, my children would not exist. So I don't know what you asked me that time, but that's what I told you.
Yes. Yes. One more question. Hold on. Yes.
Yeah. What's the male audience like that's reading? Do you think, because I feel like most of it's more geared to the female audience. Do you feel like there's a lot of
I can't hear.
Have you had men read this and
Yes.
respond to you? What do they say about it?
Did they say anything? I did a book group last week that was almost all men, and I'm trying to think if they said something different.
Wow.
But I was so thrilled. I was like, it's a bunch of guys. So the guy, one of them was a forensic accountant. So like when they went through and told me what they all did, one of them said, I'm a forensic accountant. And I went, oh my God. I've never gotten that response before. And I was like, so then I explained why I found it incredibly exciting. But yeah, they, it's sort of the same. They liked it too, I guess. They picked themselves. I didn't force it on them or anything. So
they probably like the fantasy of being a cowboy on a wealthy woman.
Oh yeah. And my brother listened to it when he was going on a long drive. He's a lawyer in Birmingham. And he's like, Snork, I think this is the best one you've done yet. And it's just like, he's like a mean lawyer who goes hunting a lot. And he's just like, I kind of cried at one point.
Aw, that's a great review.
Did anybody listen to the audiobook? I'm just curious.
Did anyone listen to the audio? You did. You did. Yes, we had a couple.
Okay, so when you had to pick the audio reader, I picked a guy from North Carolina because I knew he would get the accent, because British people are really good at Southern accents, but some people from the North or not. So I wanted a Southerner who would get like, not just the accent, but the nuances of everything. But it was so great because he was really good. And you have to listen to make sure they pronounced everything correctly. Right. And so I was listening to it and, I wrote it, so I knew what was coming. And so there's that last scene where he sees Edie it's not the last scene, but when he sees Edie for the last time, not Edie, Emily for the last time in front of the gambling casino. And I was so excited about that metaphor too. The gambling, their marriage, it's a gamble. They're standing in front of the bells are going. Oh, I was so happy about that. Anyway, they're standing in front of this. And he says to her, you don't think I'm good enough for you. So when the audiobook reader read it and his voice cracked he goes, you don't think I'm good? Yeah, I can't even do it. Good enough for you. And I burst into tears. And it wasn't like the line surprised me. I was like, oh my God, this is so sad. So it's really fun to have your book read by somebody else because they bring different things to it that it never would have occurred to you.
Right.
And I think that's really fascinating too, because before my book came out, I had never, I don't think, listened to an audiobook. And for the first one, they said, you need to pick somebody. I was like, oh, I better listen to some audiobooks. And I'm like, I'm an idiot. I never realized it was you can do your chores while you can like button up Archer's shirt while you're listening to
Aw. Well, Julia, you have been so gracious to be with us. It has been so fun to have you here.
Oh, thank you.
Everybody has loved it. We love the book.
I'm so glad. Thank you for reading it. Because the
Yes.
hardest thing is like getting people to read a book when it's somebody they don't know.
Right.
So-
Well, you can thank Nikki for the recommendation for that. She definitely pointed us in a good direction. So we're really glad to have her input in this too. So
yeah, and it was gratifying that it finally actually happened.
I know.
Like when I finished the book, like because I said to Chris, I've written 2 novels now, and neither has sucked. So that was really gratifying. I know exactly. Not to brag, but.
Oh, well, thank you so much for being with
It's
us.
so
We
fun to
really
talk to you.
appreciate your time. We really do. So,
Thank you. Thanks so
all
much.
right. Take care. Thanks.
Bye. Get
Bye.
well soon.
Okay.